The Imaginist. Whew. Okay. I'm going to start with the director, Bernadette.
Wow. Awesome.
So, how involved in this film are you? I mean, what aspect? Are you just the director that shows up on the day of shooting, just tells people what to do? Or are we talking pre-production, post-production?
Oh, yeah.
How many
Everything.
hats are you actually wearing? Because I saw you on the credits there for directing, but really?
Well, I think as a director, you're involved in every aspect of it, because the writer writes the story and then allows you to have the vision to tell the story that they wrote on paper. So that starts way at the beginning. That starts with a conversation with the writer, so that I could have a better understanding of what Mike was trying to get across, because this film comes from a feature. So it was like, okay, so what story do we want to tell? A standalone short. And how do we want to tell it? What were his thoughts? Explaining my vision, and then in this case, it being very collaborative, because he was also the producer, executive producer. So it started like from there on to casting. Some people were already pre-cast, like Lauren was pre-cast, Sahara was pre-cast, but then the rest of it was not. And so talking about that, what are we looking for? And then from casting, all the pre-production, we're getting our crew, which was a combination of people I knew and people Mike knew, and the locations and things like that. So it's very, very detailed, very, very involved, and very, you want to stay in your budget. So it makes the producers very happy, right, Mike? When you stay,
oh, yes.
when you stay in your budget. So yeah, it's everything from the beginning all the way until the end. The end meaning like when people actually get to see it.
So
Yeah.
like now.
Like right now.
Gotcha.
Right.
All right. So of all the different roles that you've been in, how was it getting into character for this particular film?
Actually, this was my third film that I had started. So I had recently came from the sports world, and then I did a lot of commercials. So my first film actually was a horror. It was a short film, and that's when I kind of learned to be more expressive, that there's more to say than words on the page. And so that was tapping into that, and then coming from going back into a sports world into another film was really much of my niche. So by this time, my mom just kind of like helped bring out more of the subtleties, tapping in more into the emotional aspects that can translate. The biggest thing I've always learned is your eyes can tell the story. So it's really portraying that, and that actually helped me further really into my career now, to the credits that I do have. So I've been able to grow and expound on that, but it really started from tapping into these shorts films and growing there. And then, it started with, I wasn't a lead, then I had more of a supporting role in the second film that I did, to being a lead in this film. And so that kind of gave me the experience to be able to be on television now and then do other films, so.
Awesome. Mr. Lara, Mike Lara, did you have a tortured childhood? Like, where does this come from? This is, that was pretty dark, man. What would you say would be the core inspiration for where you came up with this character for Dude the Mime?
Man, it goes. This goes back to 4 or 5 years old, so you're not too far off there. I was, the first thing I do is walk in Grandma's house and ask to read Uncle Bob's horror book. It was Dennis Gifford's pictorial history of horror, and that was just, from then on, I was hooked, and I just can't get it out of my system. I'm just a horror guy. So this lent a lot, a lot of influence to Imaginists. Goes back to the classic black and whites, with like Lon Chaney as the original horror Phantom of the Opera. I'm a big fan of that, of like all Lon Chaney and the classics like Frankenstein and Dracula, all that kind of stuff. But also the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, a silent film back in the 1920s, was real good too, a big influence. And of course, movies that have to do with killer clowns and jokers and that kind of stuff. But there's never been one about a mime. There's never been one about this character that couldn't tamper with your brain. We've had like the Matrix kind of thing, but he's sort of like that kind of character where he tampers with your head and makes you believe what you are experiencing actually real, and it becomes real, and your brain just pops. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
And while we're actually on the subject of the art of mime, Lauren, so just as far as this whole, here you are, an established actor, but also being very professed in the art of mime, as well as coaching, teaching other people the art of mime. What would you say are some of the parallels or contrasts in the art of mime versus other expressions of art?
Mime by its nature is a more stylized form of acting than what you see on film typically. Film aims at a more naturalistic style. I mean, of course, it depends on the film, on the style of the film, but in general, film acting is more, aims to appear more realistic, whereas mime is more stylized. It doesn't pretend to be realistic, although it still aims for believability in its own way. So bringing mime to film, I mean, I always like the idea of finding ways to use mime in film. And unfortunately, the way that Hollywood often, if not most often, uses mime in film is in a way that ridicules the art of mime, that makes it look like something kind of silly or ridiculous, makes the mime character the butt of jokes, and portrays mime in its most cliche, narrow way that it can be portrayed. And I think that comes partly from people's general unfamiliarity with the whole scope of what mime can be as a performance art, but it's kind of a circular thing, because then Hollywood portrays it in a very narrow way, and that perpetuates those stereotypes. So people never come to know it as anything else. Anyway, I mean, I could go on a long time about that, but one thing that was interesting about Imaginist was not only having a mime character portrayed in a different way that wasn't stereotypical or that didn't ridicule it, was also to play on the way that mime plays with reality. I mean, mime is known for what we call making the invisible visible, which is it's an interesting thing to put that in a realistic world, in an otherwise realistic world, but then to play with the idea of what is real and what isn't real in the way that Mike's characters experience this disconnect between what they're seeing and what they're experiencing, and is it real or is it not real? And all of that comes out of this unfortunate incident with this mime performer and the way that they treat him, first with respect and with interest, and then with indifference. I thought it was an interesting opportunity to explore mime in a different way than you typically see it on film.
Sure. I definitely say that the pendulum swung the other way this time around. Not so much a laughing point in this film. Okay, so I'd open it up for all of you. What would you say would be, if anything, one thing that you learned in the process of going through this production? Literally anybody.
Is that
Oh,
Got it very tense.
you know, I'll go ahead. Yeah, for me, and being a writer, it's very difficult to get your work out there, like commercially and stuff. And so what I've learned was to, not be afraid to wear more than just one hat. Not just being a writer, but putting yourself out there to producing something that you wrote and getting it out there. In this case, in an executive producer, which I'll never do again, but just getting it out there and stuff, and other little hats like getting involved in some of the technical work, like editing or that kind of stuff. I've never even been on it. I've never really fully been on a set like this before and stuff. And I'm like, whoa, what I mean? And so, it's like I'm just trying to write my stories and stuff, and then here you are, in this big elaborate scene. So yeah, I think it's just learning to not be scared or afraid to take on other hats other than just the one that I've been chosen to do and stuff, but doing other things. So that's me.
Sure.
Yeah.
Should we just keep it down? Oh, okay. I guess I learned a couple of things. From the acting perspective, it was a lot about beats, moments, also kind of continuing to get comfortable being on set. A lot of the acting process is, especially these days, is self-tapes. So half of it is in your own mind, and then your reader, and nobody else around you. So you got to create this whole environment, which is difficult sometimes, but then you start to get used to it. And then even on set, it being horror, you're not really like in this situation for real, but you still have to create that environment being in that. And so I think learning how to not only create that for myself, but also create what's real for myself within a fake environment has helped me in continuing to just even in the audition process. And then also the comfortability of being on set and feeling like I belong. The biggest thing I, got to do something this year, and it's just like that moment, like you feel like you're starting to make it, but then you can still have that imposter syndrome of, I don't even know if I'm with heavy hitters at this point, so like, do I even belong? But then it's going back to being like, I did the building blocks to get there. And so definitely grateful. A lot of people always ask, how do you get started? I see that you're like working, like they only see the success of it, but then it's the grinding. So it is doing these short films. It is maybe not getting paid a lot. It is the building blocks. It is the classes. It is the personal coachings. Like I am lucky enough that my mom's not only the director, but after that it helped build our own personal relationship where she's my coach. So a lot of my success has been aided because of her. So I just got to learn how to also network, continue to build, and then I think I got interested in other ways of production. So it also lended to me being an executive producer for another short film. So not that I got to be in it, but I got to take another role within the entertainment industry. And then from there, I've also taught myself editing. So there's just a plethora of things to learn, to grasp from, to talk to, different things to learn from different people. So I feel like being on set is honestly the best feeling, no matter what part, if it's small or if it's big, you can still take away something.
So,
Um, okay, so the first thing that I learned was that I love directing horror. Um, and I never would have, if you had asked me, hey, you know, do you see yourself directing horror movies? I would have been like, no. But Mike's, I loved his vision. I grew up with Marcel Marceau, so being able to actually work with Lauren and knowing that he was trained by Marcel Marceau, I was just like, yes, this is the way. But it just, I've done, outside of Imaginist, I've directed 2 other suspense thriller, one suspense thriller, and then I'm in the process of working on my next, which is horror. So I'm like, I can't get away from it. And I think it's because you can take reality, especially with Jordan Peele and Misha Green and how they've taken the whole concept of horror noir, and you're able to tell your stories and expound on them in this horror way, you know? I love that idea, that I can actually take something that's painful for us in our culture, but tell it in this horror way, and where it doesn't beat you over the head, but it gets you to think, you know, and it gets you to have those aha moments. The next thing that I learned was that being a director, because I come from theater, so I directed theater, and then I transitioned to film, and definitely we had some challenges with this movie, and being able to stay level-headed and being able to keep your set where people enjoy coming to work, and want to work with you again, you know, even in the midst of crisis, was a huge learning curve. You don't know what you can handle, and you don't know what kind of leader, so to speak, because as a director, you are a leader on set, that you're going to be when you're thrown so many curveballs. And it was really good to know that how, as an actor, what I want for a set that I'm working on, I was able to give that in the circumstances of the Imaginist, and able to build on that and make my sets tighter and tighter with every project that I've done. And so it was just a great experience of working with so many talented people who were all on the same page about what we wanted, and you know, and then Lauren had to leave, but he was so awesome. He let me shoot all his stuff in one day, and I was like, please, it wasn't it, because you had to go and do your conference.
I was teaching. Oh yeah, I was teaching. Yeah.
He was teaching, so I was like, can you help me get all this done? And he was such a great trooper. And then we had our costumer who stepped in for him at the end because he couldn't be there. So it was just a really collaborative effort that just made me cement being a filmmaker and not regretting any aspect of the grind.
So to me, I learn something every time I play a new role. Creating a new character always involves learning something new, exploring something new. I had played, I guess I haven't done a lot of horror films. I've done some horror films as an actor, mostly as zombie characters, and which are, you know, that there's a very physical component to zombie characters, but not so much of a deep personality that you have to figure out. So that's a different kind of thing. So playing a you know, like a horror villain was something new for me, and but also, I mean, in doing a mime character, one of the things I like doing with mime is something dramatic, because people tend to think of mime as comic, if not always as comic, and there is dramatic mime. There's fantastic dramatic mime, and I love to do dramatic mime as well, but I've never taken it into the realm of horror. And to see how to use it in a really dark way like that, you know, to use the movement to create a horror villain was something new for me. So that was fun.
Right on. Okay, guys, thank you so much for giving us a chance to get a little bit more behind the scenes on this film. Ladies and gentlemen, cast of the IMAGINIST.